Hello and welcome to the I Can Do podcast with Benjamin Lee. We're here to talk about tips and strategies to have an I Can Do mindset. Life is what you put into it. Get the most you can. Here's your host, Benjamin Lee.
Hello and welcome to the I Can Do podcast. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee. This is episode number 64, and it has been a while since the last episode number 63. So first, I want to say thank you. Thank you for tuning in wherever you may be. We have listeners all around the world, and I certainly appreciate your willingness to check out this podcast. You know, there are so many different podcasts that are out there. And if you were listening when I got started back in 2019, 2019. Wow. I think it was November 2019. It was something that I wanted to do to really prove to myself that I could do it. I had this microphone. I'm still using the same microphone. It may be time for me to get an upgrade, but I had it in the closet at my office at the building, the church building, and it was just sitting there. In retrospect, I wish I would have picked it up back in 2017 or 2018, but we can't live in the past, right? So we take the next best step. So thankfully, that's what I did. I want to encourage you to do the same thing. Maybe it is a podcast. Look, there's no pressure when it comes to starting a blog, when it comes to starting a podcast. What is key is making sure that we are constantly growing. Now, that does not mean that we are constantly busy or feeling overwhelmed all the time. But what it does mean is that we are pushing, we are striving to become better in some shape or form. Maybe it's conquering a fear. Maybe it's sharing your voice, sharing your thoughts, sharing your opinions, whatever it may be. Having a podcast has to be one of the easiest ways to do it. So it took me a while to figure that out, though. And maybe you're in the same place. I want to encourage you to give it a shot, all right? So this episode here, episode number 64, is really about just a few updates and a book recommendation. So since my last podcast, I started off on Buzzsprout. Buzzsprout is a great platform if you're looking to get started with podcasting. That's where I first began. It's fairly easy. They have free options as well as paid options, depending on how much you want to do and how often you're going to be speaking and recording. I think it was back in either 2019 or early 2020 where I had lunch, or I met up with a friend of mine at Chick-fil-A, and she had a podcast, and I asked her what platform she was using, and she mentioned Anchor.fm. Now, at the time, I was not familiar with Anchor.fm, but in hindsight, again, there's another one of those cases, right, where if you could go back in time, I would have moved over to Anchor.fm, and let me tell you why. I have moved this podcast, the I Can Do podcast, over to Anchor, which is by Spotify. So it has to be one of the easiest ways ever to record a podcast, upload it, to get the podcast on all the major platforms like Spotify, like Apple Podcast, and the other major platforms that are out there where you can listen. So the reason why I moved this one, I Can Do, was because I started a new podcast. The new podcast is called the Today and Tomorrow podcast. This one, the Today and Tomorrow podcast, is really all about building your faith. Most of you who are listening know that I'm a Christian, I'm a minister, so obviously faith is very important to me. Faith, family, fitness, and food. So I wanted to drill down or maybe focus a little bit more on one subject. If you notice this podcast, I've been able to talk about a variety of things because that's where my mind was when I first got started in 2019. Now I'm seeing that there is a great benefit of really honing in on what I'm trying to get across. So I've even changed the category of this podcast. It was in Christianity. It was in health and fitness. Now I've just put it under self-improvement, because I think most of these episodes, if not all of them, it's designed in some shape or form. Now, I have talked a lot about faith and family and fitness and food on this podcast, but I've had a lot of different people that I've interviewed and picking up tips from them and how they are successful. And so I wanted to change this podcast up a bit. And so hopefully you'll begin to see the difference as we move forward in this podcast. So going back to what I just mentioned a moment ago, I started a new one called the Today and Tomorrow podcast. You can check it out. It's on all the major platforms. And I decided to give Anchor.fm a shot. Well, when I did, it was amazing to see how easy it really was. So I don't have to go through GarageBand when recording these episodes anymore. I can do it all from there, all from my dashboard and my account. So once I figured that out, and once I figured out that I can record in the same place, I could add music to my intros and outros. I don't necessarily have to go to a particular company to do that. There's certainly nothing wrong. The intro that you just heard, that was through a company where you can give them a script and they will do a voiceover for you. But with Anchor.fm, if you want to save money and really start a podcast essentially for free, it's like so easy. So I highly recommend it. My wife and one of her friends, they are going to be beginning a podcast next month. And so when they get launched, I will definitely let you know about that as well. And I've been coaching them with their podcast. So helping them to avoid hopefully some of the same mistakes that I've made along the way. So that's one of the biggest things that's new, where now I have two podcasts. I tell you what, I'll tell you this too. There was, Anchor, they talk about how you can record a podcast on your cell phone. And I wanted to see, all right, how easy is it to really record a podcast on your cell phone? So I wanted to give it a shot. So actually I took a bath and I created a podcast actually in the bathtub. It is called the Bathtub Bubbles Podcast. And so I wanted to see, could I actually record an episode while taking a bath? And you know what? I did. And so I have 3 podcasts, not 2. All right. So if you want to check that out, you can do that as well. I have not done too much with that, but I wanted to see, is this really as easy as they say it is? And it really is. So maybe you give it a shot and that will help you out. So that's a couple of new updates there. One of the other things that I want to do as I move forward, since I'm really focusing on self-improvement in a variety of ways, I want to start giving some book recommendations. I just signed up for a book club with my university. I went to the University of Illinois and they have this alumni book club. So I'm really excited about joining that. I participated in a book club with 2 brothers from the congregation where I preach, and we met weekly via Zoom, and that was really exciting. So hopefully I'm going to start my own book club. I like to do that, right? Have a I Can Do book club where we meet maybe via Zoom once a month, or we talk about what's exciting, what's new. And so I want to share with you a book recommendation. It is called 11 Rings, The Soul of Success. 11 Rings, The Soul of Success. It is by Phil Jackson. It came out a few years ago. #1 New York Times bestseller. I've been curious about Phil Jackson. Obviously, he, I think, is the best NBA coach, one of the best coaches ever. And he won 6 NBA titles with the Chicago Bulls and 5 NBA titles with the Los Angeles Lakers. I've gotten more interested in him after watching The Last Dance. That was that special series. What was that on? Was that on Netflix? I think it was on Netflix. Or maybe it was Hulu. I can't remember. But wherever it is, you need to watch it. The Last Dance was really good. And it really just kind of brought back. It was interesting how, shows like that, the documentary of the last season where the Chicago Bulls ended up winning their 6th NBA title. And so they had a ton of footage from that last season. So it was just fascinating. And there's a chapter in this book called The Last Dance. So it really takes you on a journey. Phil Jackson played in the NBA for the New York Knicks. He already had a couple of NBA rings before he ever coached in the NBA. And it's just fascinating to see how his childhood really shaped him. He grew up in a very religious family. I believe he grew up in a Pentecostal family. And so that had a lot of impact on him with spiritual beliefs. And it was just fascinating how he interacted with the players, how he was able to keep their attention, push them when necessary, pull back when necessary, and keep things fresh. I think that's one of the biggest challenges for so many of us, right? We kind of get in a rut, we kind of get in a groove, and sometimes that can be good, but sometimes that may not always be good. So he provides a lot of different things that he did with those teams. And so he has a big background, right? With, I'm just looking at the back here, through exploring everything from humanistic psychology to Native American philosophy to Zen meditation. Jackson developed a new approach to leadership. And I think you can say that's very true just with the people that he was coaching and just how big these individuals were, like Michael Jordan and Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant. So it's a fascinating book. So if you're looking for a book that may be a little bit different with respect to a leadership book, right, where it's not 20 things or 30 things or 10 things, but kind of taking you on this journey, I would recommend Phil Jackson's book, 11 Rings. If you're a big sports fan and you like to know how teams work and the challenges behind the scenes, I would definitely recommend it as well. So what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be giving more book recommendations. I'm going to be recording a new podcast that will be available every Tuesday and also every Thursday. So be keeping tabs on that. Be looking out for that as well. And if you have something that you like for me to talk about, or a book recommendation, or if you are interested in maybe joining me with starting a book club, please let me know. So this episode is really all about giving you some updates. And again, I appreciate you listening, and I appreciate you checking me out. So hope all is well with you, and I'll talk to you later. Take care. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. If you are in the need or looking for more motivation in your life, feel free to check out my website, benjaminlee.blog, where you can find hundreds of encouraging, motivational blog posts on a variety of subjects. You can find all of my books, which can also be found on Amazon.com, and other podcast interviews with a variety of people. I hope this helps. Please leave me a rating and a review. I can do, and so can you. Take care, and God bless.